Today we are going to be graphing sine and cosine functions with period changes. That will be affected by our b value here. So the number in front of x will no longer be 1. Okay? The larger the number, the more frequently the graph will repeat, and the smaller the number, the less frequently the graph will repeat. So we know when we talk about a graph repeating that we need to look at the period. So here's how you would calculate that out. And before we do anything else, we do need to find the period. So our period, we'll always use this formula. It'll be 2 pi divided by b. So in our case, that is 2 pi divided by 2, or just pi. Okay, that's our period. Now, when we set up our graph, we're going to use this new period. So let's set up our x-axis to go straight across, our y-axis to go straight up and down. Now we know the amplitude of this function here is 1. So we're only going to go up to 1 and down to -1 on the y-axis. Now, our period has changed. It's pi. So instead of going out to 2 pi, we're only going to go out to pi, and then to -pi in the negative direction, obviously starting at 0. Our critical values fall at even intervals on here, and there are 4 of them, so we're going to do pi and break it into 4 equal pieces. So halfway, just like such. Okay. This first piece is pi divided by 4, because we broke it into 4 equal pieces. So if that's 1 pi over 4, then the next one obviously is going to be halfway between them, so that's pi over 2. So that's 1 pi over 4. You could think of this as 2 pi over 4. And then this one is 3 pi over 4. So there's a quick little pattern. 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. Very similar to a pattern we used on the unit circle. Alright, and from there we're just going to reflect those around the y-axis into our negative side here. So negative pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 4. Ta-da, we have our axis set up. Now for our table of values, I'm going to slide up here just a little bit so we have room. I'm going to just put those right down here. We're still going to use all of our critical values. Don't think that you don't have to do those. So on the top, we'll do our x component, and on the bottom here, instead of y, we're going to put sine of 2x. Okay, so when we set these up, we have negative pi, negative 3 pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 4. Don't forget the 0. I saw people do that. It makes your graph, your pattern not correct. Pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and lastly but not least, pi. Okay, now we just need to work out our values so that we know what coordinate points to plot. Alright, so we're going to start off with 0. So the calculations work like this. Sine of 2 times 0. Now, when you do these, work out everything inside the parentheses first. 2 times 0 is 0. So we all know that sine of 0 is 0. You can use a calculator for that if you don't remember. Moving on to the next point, pi over 4. Sine of 2 times pi over 4. That's a sine of... Now we're going to do 2 times the pi, always the whole number, times the numerator when you're multiplying fractions. So that's 2 pi over 4 is what we end up with. And then this needs to be reduced, so that'll become the sine of pi over 2, which we all know to be 1. Okay, let's continue on to our next coordinate point here. Sine of 2 times pi over 2. Multiply 2 times the numerator. 2 times pi is 2 pi over 2. Reduce it out to the sine of pi, and we know that should be 0. 3 pi over 4. Sine of 2 times 3 pi over 4. So that would be the sine of 6 pi over 4. Reduce that out. Sine of 6 over 4 reduces to 3 pi over 2. Sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1. Hopefully you're starting to see the pattern by now. Let's work out one more point just to make sure we got it correct here. The pi. So sine of 2 times pi, that's easy. Sine of 2 pi is 0. Okay. Again, you could use the calculations to get the rest of these points, but let's think what's going on. 0 is going up to 1, down to 0, down to -1, back up to 0, and if we go backwards, it goes down, up, up, down, so we got to go down to -1, up to 0, up to +1, and back down to 0. Great. The only thing we have left now is to plot those points. So let's see what our graph looks like. Okay, at -pi we are at 0, -3 pi over 4 we are at 1, -pi over 2 at 0, -pi over 4 at -1, 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. Notice I'm going a little bit faster with plotting the points this time. You should be getting the hang of that. Okay, and then we'll play connect the dots. Nice smooth mountains and rounded off valleys. No, we don't want any jagged peaks here. Please continue to work on that. Up around like this. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the graph of y equals the sine of 2x. Notice how our period is changed. We only went to pi. There's one repetition. It is half as long. Okay, that's it.